Okay. Well, first of all, my name is Sinead Matson. I work as a postdoctoral researcher on the Tutor Project, and I'd like to welcome you here to this webinar this evening. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy evenings to join this very important conversation with us. Before we get started, can I just say a few words about the Tutor Project and some general housekeeping? This webinar is being recorded and will be put on our tutor website afterwards. So for this reason, can everyone bar the panelists please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones? For the first hour, Melanie, our host, will host the discussion between the panelists. And if you have any questions that you could ask, we have a section at the end. But if you have a burning question or comment, please put it into the chat and we'll direct it to Melanie or the panelists at the end. Melanie will direct the questions to the panelists, as many as she can, and then afterwards we'll send, with the webinar recording link, we'll send everybody's contact details, their official contact details, if you'd like to get in touch with any individual and find out more afterwards. With regards to the Tutor Project, it is a 3-year Erasmus Plus funded research project with the aim of creating more inclusive education. Our research partners stretch across the EU, Ireland, Austria, Greece, and Turkey. The 3 main target groups in this research project are the LGBTQI+ community, migrant and ethnic minority communities, such as the traveller community and the Roma community, and students who are currently experiencing or come from areas that have historically experienced socioeconomic disadvantage. We bring an intersectional lens to this research because no person is wholly one aspect of their identity, and we acknowledge the structures of systems of power, privilege, and oppression that people can live within and experience. Currently, we have just finalized a CPD program that we have designed based on the results of our research from the past 2 years for second level and further education and training educators. And we are due to start advertising for participants to take part in a pilot of the CPD project. So if you are interested in learning more, please email me at sinead.matson@mu.ie. Don't worry, I'll put that into the chat. Or ask us at the end. And again, we'll send out more information with the link to the website that's reported. Just a reminder before I go on that we are recording. This video will appear on our website. So can everyone bar the panelists please turn off their cameras and their microphones. And for now, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Bernie Grummel, who will introduce our new ambassador to host this evening's proceedings. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. And we're delighted to have everybody here. And in particular, I just wanted to introduce our tutor ambassador, Melanie, who's going to host and lead this particular webinar. And we're delighted to have Melanie involved in this, in particular, in terms of I just wanted to give you a little sense of Melanie's background and why we asked her to take on this role. Melanie at the moment is a final year doctoral researcher and occasional lecturer with us in Maynooth University. And her area of interest is race and ethnicity in education. And her research is a fascinating exploration of Black, Asian and Irish traveller students' experiences of racial microaggressions in school during their years in post-primary and the consequent impact of that using critical race theory. She lectures in social justice and global citizen education modules, and also works in teacher education with professional masters in education and the Bachelor of Education students, and as well has a background in terms of as a former student teacher and working with student teachers, and believes that teachers are a really powerful force to either perpetuate or disrupt racial inequalities. In her own research and her teaching practice, she uses counter-narrative storytelling as a methodology and a pedagogical tool to critically analyse racialised social reality in the education system and society. And in both her practice and in particular in her research, she's narrating the authentic lived experience of racially oppressed students and challenging student teachers to seek and act out emancipatory solutions to these racial inequalities that we see across our education system and our society. So I'll hand over to Melanie now just to introduce our other guests, our other co-facilitators this evening. Thanks, Melanie. Melanie, are you okay to speak now? I think you're still on mute. I can see that. Yeah, there it is.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Bernie. Gia Hoich. Good evening, everybody. It's really, really wonderful to be with you all this evening. I'm so excited, genuinely excited about today's conversation. I just want to echo Sinead's words that thank you so much for everybody who's joined us. We asked Alfie how many had registered. He said 130. And I thought, oh my goodness, thank goodness it's a webinar, because I would have passed out with nerves seeing 130 people before me. So we're really, really, really happy to have you all with us this evening. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to dive straight ahead and introduce our wonderful panel. We have first up, we have Lillian Mwanze. So a bit about Lillian. Lillian migrated from Nigeria, where she qualified and worked as a barrister and solicitor of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Her experience in education in Ireland triggered her interest in issues of inclusion, social justice, cultural competence, and anti-racism in the classroom. After completing a master's in international and European business law in Trinity College, Lillian then moved to Maynooth University. We're very lucky to have her, where she completed a higher diploma in further education, as well as her doctoral studies. Her PhD research inquired into the experiences Black migrant women in Ireland have had with racism, and she used the insights from the women to propose a culturally responsive anti-racist pedagogy for use in Irish adult education. Her broader research interests include social justice in the adult learning spaces, the inclusion of underrepresented groups in educational spaces, anti-racist, critical, and culturally relevant pedagogies, lifelong learning, and exploring diverse ways of knowing. Lillian currently serves as co-director of both the Higher Diploma in Further Education and the Turn to Teaching program in Maynooth University. She's also a member of the Higher Education Authority Anti-Racism Advisory Group. You're very welcome, Lillian. We're delighted you could be here with us this evening. Next up, we have Spiwe Moyo. So Spiwe holds a master's in refugee integration and is a qualified anti-racism facilitator, having trained with the Irish Network Against Racism. She's currently working with Empower and serves on the board of UNHCR. She also guest lectures in Technical University Dublin in the Community and Youth Development Program. Her interest in social justice, racial justice, and human rights began during her time as a student in both second and third level institutions in Ireland. She currently serves on the board of the All Ireland Endorsement Boards for Community Work Ireland. Spiwe's interests and commitment to these causes reflect her deep dedication to advocating for marginalized communities. You're very welcome, Spiwe. Thank you for availing yourself to participate in this webinar. We really appreciate your presence. And then last but not least, we have Audrey Bryan with us this evening. Audrey Bryan is an associate professor of sociology in the School of Human Development at Dublin City University's Institute of Education. Her teaching spans a number of undergraduate as well as postgraduate programs in the sociology of childhood, sociology of education, advanced research methods, and sustainability. Her PhD research explored the experiences of racially and ethnically minoritized students, as well as the enactments of intercultural education in Irish schools. She's also section editor with Yoko Michizuki of the climate section of the Springer Handbook of Children and Youth Studies 2024. You're very welcome, Audrey. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Is Audrey with us? Did we lose her along the way? Okay. So I'm going to just fire ahead and go straight into our questions. So I'll ask the panelists the question, and each one is going to answer the same question, bringing different views and different perspectives. So the first question directed at our panelists is, how do you define racially inclusive education, and why, in your opinion, is it important today? Can everybody hear me? Okay, so Lillian, would you be willing to go first? Oh, you're not able to unmute yourself. Oh yeah, okay. Alfie, it seems like
no.
there we go.
Thanks, Melanie. When I was nodding vigorously, I didn't expect that you would call me to go first. So I regret my actions. But thanks. And thank you. I wasn't able to unmute myself to say thank you after the introduction. And thanks to everyone on the project for having me. I was just taking some notes tonight. It has been a very long day, but I was just taking some notes tonight to see what do I really think racially inclusive education is. And what I had down was that I think that it is an approach to teaching and learning and pedagogy, the wider, whatever we call pedagogy, right? That first recognizes the transgenerational inequities, because it's easy to jump right in and just start talking about the classroom and all of that. I think it's an approach to teaching, learning, pedagogy, and everything education that first recognizes that transgenerational trauma, the inequities that racism and the likes have caused. And this approach will then use the educational space to mitigate and interrupt these inequities. And this can be done by curriculum change, changing the demography in education, representation, and all of that. But I do think that the starting point is first acknowledging that there has been transgenerational inequities, and then using the educational space in some shape or form, whether by representation or tweaking curriculum or dealing with things to mitigate and then address this. So this is what I think racially inclusive education is. And I think the second part of your question was the importance.
Yeah, specifically today, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think, and I'm going to be really brief, that if done right, because it could mean different things to different people, but I do think that if inclusive education is done right, it could have reparative effects, which will also, again, be transgenerational and will cause a shift in a particular way. So it can be reparative, it can be transformative. So there's a lot of talk about transformative education. I think this will be the starting point, and not just transformative for those who are minoritized. It will be transformative for everyone. I've had to use this example in different spaces. Every time we improve education by making it more inclusive, and I'm sure we'll talk more when the other speakers come on, they will talk more about what this means. We improve education for everyone, not just the minoritized. So apart from the reparative quality and the transformative quality, it is powerful for the entire education system. We're talking about Ireland, because I will stop there and let the other speakers go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lillian. My key takeaways in what you've said there was the transgenerational and the transformative. Thank you so much. Okay, Spiwe, what about on your end then? How do you define racially inclusive education, and why is it important today?
I would agree with what Lillian has already said, but I will also look into saying that a racial inclusive education system is that one that reflects diversity. When you look at the education, or whether it's the teachers, they reflect that there are children from different minority communities. They can see themselves in that, and then and then a system that also fosters equality within the system, and also improves the outcomes for the minorities and everyone else within the society. So in this space, it's essential for an equitable and diverse environment, as we are in this multicultural society. So it's providing that where you could see the teachers that reflect, you see the curriculum that reflects the minority that's there. So it's very important for that as well. So I'm just adding up on what Lillian has said.
Perfect. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Spirit of Diversity and Equality. Thank you so much. Over to you now, Audrey.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a hard act to follow. I think both kind of explanations have been so rich and comprehensive. I suppose if I was to, building and maybe echoing what's come, but maybe, thinking about this from the perspective of a white educator, so from the perspective of somebody who's racialized as white. I think for me, racially inclusive education is very much about a willingness and a disposition to ask difficult questions of oneself and how one is kind of located within the broader kind of social system, which we know is very hierarchical, a lot, and we know that, we live in a society that is segregated, and it's racialized. So for me, it's racially inclusive education is a form of education that demands something of the learner in the classroom, I suppose. And for those of us who are racialized as white, I think it means that we should embrace an understanding of ourselves as implicated in the conditions that contribute to even the most extreme forms of racist violence, right? And this can be, I think, very difficult for those of us who are, who identify as white. And in an Irish context, I think this is especially challenging, not least because of our kind of history of colonialism. There tend to be a lot of kind of, tropes of, well, we were colonized, we were never colonizers. And so a lot of tropes around essentially imperial innocence, whereas in reality, if you look at Irish involvement in empire, it paints a much more complex and ambivalent picture. So I think kind of a willingness and a disposition to ask oneself difficult questions is really important. And those questions can include things such as, what, so as an educator, right, what function does silence or a failure to address racist inequality serve? Like, who is let off the moral hook, for example, when we fail to meaningfully engage with racism in the course of our, our teaching and in our syllabi, in our curricula and everything else. So it's the idea that, through our pedagogy, some people are advantaged by decisions that we make, right? So it's the idea that everything is kind of political. Every curriculum choice, every pedagogical choice is on some level political. And what I mean by that is that it has consequences or implications for not just, the people who are in front of us, but in terms of the broader kind of representation. So yeah, it's really about that kind of willingness to ask questions. And I suppose to also, and I can speak more about this, I'm going to stop now and just give other people a chance, but also a willingness to kind of take risks and make mistakes as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Audrey. So it's that positionality, acknowledging your positionality and your privilege as a white educator, and ditto 100% with this. My thesis, I was writing my context chapter, which I sent to Bernie the other day, and for a long time, the conversation around racism in Ireland wasn't around, whether, it was around whether racism existed, not how it existed, because there was this whole thing that surely we can't be racist. So excellent, very, very, very excellent points brought up there. Thank you so much. Okay, and then just shifting now to get more of an understanding about the current landscape. The question that I'd like to ask is, what are some key challenges that educational institutions in Ireland face in achieving racial inclusivity? So we'll start, maybe Lily, will we do it that way so Audrey has a chance to catch her breath, and then we'll start with you because you were the first to answer. That's okay. Or Spirit, if you want to hop in first, whatever way is perfectly fine. So what are some of the key challenges that our educational institutions, our universities, our schools are facing in achieving racial inclusivity? What are the obstacles? What are the challenges?
I think for me, I'll start with also maybe looking at the diversity, the lack of diversity in teachers within the curriculum. I think I was one of the people who was fortunate enough to go through maybe second level and go through to third level in Ireland, and I think in the second level, I didn't see anyone who was from a minority background, but there will be teachers. And I think one of the things as well, even in the curriculum, I remember at one point I was having an argument with my tutors in terms of when they were presenting, we're talking about diseases and things like that, or when we talk about poverty, I think the more of the reflection will be, okay, let's look at maybe the poverty in Africa as an example, but we are here, like poverty is all across different areas. And so it made as if like when you are there sitting there and you are there and it's more like reflection. It's like it's reflecting back on you. So you kind of like feel like how do I answer this? How do I say, because I understand that there are diseases of land. There are some diseases that, when I arrived here, I started learning about them. But now I'm here in class and then we're talking about, the diseases and some of the things in the curriculum. And then when we talk about diseases, we then reflect on Black people and in Africa, and that's what you see in the textbook. So I can't really blame, say, the tutor, but it's something that's being there, that's being taught. And so for someone who's never been in Africa, when they see that and they're being taught, when they see me, they're thinking, oh, okay, it's those people that have flies when they can't even swipe them away, because it's in the textbook. It's what that goes on. So for me, it's being able to say, when we talk about, say, disease or anything or any topic that you are teaching, you are able to look at both, whether it's from here or from where, you look at the bad and the positive of a society, of a people, so that you still give them that dignity, not like looking at it when you're reflecting on things that are bad or giving examples or learning material that talks about, that part of someone in a bad light. We all have all our, all those things. So it's those things that you meet in. And then the language as well, it's sometimes within the space, we've got people who might be coming from other countries, or young children who are coming in with their parents. And sometimes English is not the first language of instruction. So how do you then bring them forward and support them in that space? Is it supportive as well? And also the material, sometimes like you would find some very offensive languages, and it's something that is so giving background in terms of when you are supporting or you want to address that kind of a topic. I know at one point when we were learning about racism or racial justice, and we had to watch some of some stuff that was like that was there. There was some kind of language. So what the teacher will do will then give a background on the story and when and how and to give it context, so that when everyone is they understand. So for me, it's those kind of things, because it's something that's there, that's the curriculum that's there. So for you as a teacher, what do you do? Because you understand, you are looking at the class that you are teaching, you know the people that you are teaching. So how do you then adapt it to suit the what we call this to suit the students that you are teaching? And as well, also it also comes when you talk about this topic, and when we talk about racial justice and things like that, there's that tendency of maybe it's not there, because
Yeah.
it depends on how it manifests itself. It's also in the system, and some of it, it's like, that one where it's like, shish, it's just below. And that even the person that's facing it doesn't know how to deal it. And sometimes it becomes easier to deal to ignore the situation. So those are the challenges that are there. People ignore, people don't want to talk about the issue, the curriculum, people don't want to revise and see or really look at the different students, the diversity that now we're here. So how does that affect, if I use this material, how is it affecting my class? When I look at the diversity of my class, does it then bring others? Does it, those are kind of the conversations. So these are challenges, but it's things that can be also be done by, like, as individual teachers in classes, depending on your class diversity. Yeah.
Brilliant. So there's hope, there's a sense of agency and hope that we can do something about it.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Lillian or Audrey, whoever wants to jump in next.
Yeah, I'm okay. I have very little to say. I definitely do agree with Sipiwe. She started with a very important point that I also had down. And what I did have down was there's a lack of clarity. What really is the racial inclusivity or inclusiveness? I was at a training today earlier with a colleague, and someone said, this person is a second level teacher, and the person said, when I started in this school, there were very few minoritized students.
Yeah.
But in a few years, the minoritized students now became more. And my question is that racial? Have we included the students? Is that really what we are talking about, a majority? Because what are you including them to? And I think that's what Sipiwe was saying. Are you including these people into spaces where they will feel unsafe, or they are using language or they're not seeing themselves in the text? So I think that the first challenge is maybe a lack of understanding of what the ask really is. What is the inclusion? What are we really asking for? Are we saying that we want more minoritized students? Or are we asking, are minoritized people only good enough to be students? What's going on in the teaching cadre? So I think a lack of clarity is one big challenge. I think a lack of criticality is another big challenge. And again, Sipiwe spoke about it. At what level are we looking at race and racism, and how are we dealing with this? Do we understand the wider systems? Do we understand how those play out in the spaces, in the learning spaces, but also in the staff rooms? Melanie, you were a teacher. I'm sure you can tell us stories and stories of horrible things that happen in staff rooms. So there's also a lack of criticality. And when we're talking about minoritized people, it isn't that there's a phrase I hate to use, but it's not just this dichotomy of, oh, they're black and oh, they're white. There are many other racialized people. Do we understand the criticality? I think that there's also a misunderstanding that causes everything about racial inclusion to become a tick box exercise. Again, I go back to that example. We now have more minoritized students, mainly Black students in a school. So all is well with the world. We are doing excellently. Tick.
Yeah.
And we are not checking where are we bringing the students in, or even the staff. Like, where are we bringing the staff into? Are we bringing them into a toxic environment? Are we bringing them into their death and saying, well, we've brought them in, so all is well? So I think that because of the lack of understanding of the entire terrain that we should be looking into, we are not getting it right, but we can. I do salute Sipiwe's hope, and I fall right behind her. There is hope. I also think that sometimes there's a lack of buy-in from the top. So occasionally people call you to do training in their institution. We want to be more inclusive. and then the leaders aren't there. So I go into a school once in a while, I meet the occasional principal or the occasional head of department, but sometimes the leaders are not there. So once there's no buy-in, it's usually a red flag that this will amount to a tick box exercise. We'll waste our time and nothing will get done. And I think that the last challenge I have down is that most times people don't know what to do. And that is great. Like half the time, I don't know what to do either. But if we become comfortable enough to have the conversations, maybe together, we will then be able to chart a course. So these are the challenges I have down. I will stop now.
Excellent, excellent points. Thank you, Lillian. Thank you so much for your inputs. Audrey?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. Maybe just to follow on from what Lillian was saying, I think one of the things that kind of exacerbates the lack of clarity and the lack of criticality is that teachers have been expected really to operate in kind of a policy as well as practice-based vacuum for a really long time. Like we've had, you know, it was like 2004, 2005 when the intercultural education guidelines were published, and you know, the problems with those have been well articulated, like in terms of their tendency to abnormalize rather than affirm diversity. And so we've been waiting a very long time for, I suppose, more tangible, more meaningful, more racially inclusive and progressive curriculum guidelines, educational guidelines more broadly. So I suppose I'm somewhat hopeful that the next iteration of those, you know, is going to be underpinned by you know, much more critically oriented set of frameworks. So I'm kind of waiting for that with bated breath, and you know, I know, you know, some of the folks who are here tonight are involved in really advancing that, and so I think that's really wonderful that's finally happening, right? Because it's just been it's been so long. But and I suppose what that means is that, you know, anti-racist pedagogy gets left then to individual teachers to champion it, and that can be a very lonely place. And you know that it's kind of linked to, you know, the earlier points around the need for a whole of education response to, you know, a really complex and challenging area.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Audrey. I'd like to steer us now towards strategies and approaches. One of the things that the students that I work with, the wonderful PMEs that I have the pleasure of working with, always say, we just want to know what to do. What can we do? And a lot of the times they say, you know, theory is always thrown at us, but we just want to know, just tell us practically, what can we do? Just tell us what is it that we can do to make things better? What is it that we can do to be more racially inclusive? So I thought at this juncture, what we could do is I extracted a few quotations from my research, so things that participants shared with me. As Bernie said earlier on, my research looks into Black, Asian, and Irish traveler students' experiences of racism, in particular, racial microaggressions in post-primary contexts. So what I'll do now is read two of the quotations for you, and then I'll ask you a question afterwards. Is that all right, Lillian, Spiwe, and Audrey? Is that okay? Okay. So the first quotation is from Remy, obviously not his real name. And Remy is a Black student, Afro-Irish of Nigerian origin. And this is what Remy had to say to me. So he said, so this kid, yeah, he called me the N-word 3 times in the space of a month. And I brought it up to the teachers at the time, and they kind of dismissed it as though it was nothing. That's Remy's story. We move on now to Sally's story. Sally is a student from the Irish traveler community. And she says, I think for me, the most dangerous thing is for people not to say anything. It's the silence. I told the principal the story. I told him the situation, that some girls were repeatedly using the K word in class. And the principal was like, look, you can't stop people from saying what they want to. You can't stop or change the conversation they're having. So it just got dropped completely. Nobody did anything about it. This was a big deal because they had the power to change that. So those are excerpts from Remy and from Sally. And the question that I will pose to the panel now is, in terms of action and practical things, what approach or what strategy could the educators that were involved in these real life scenarios have taken to promote racial justice? And because I believe racial justice and racial inclusivity go hand in hand. So what strategy or approaches could these educators have taken in response to Remy and Sally when they reported these incidents? Anyone who wants to jump in is more than welcome. Let's go first.
I think for me, because I also would say I come across that a lot in my line of work. And I think I remember at one point I got a call from a parent who asked me to say, I don't even know what to do because I've gone to the principal and they are not even responding. What had happened is the son had been called that word, and so, and then even the son didn't go home and tell the mom that this is what happened at school. So and then the mother got a call from the school, from one of the teachers saying, oh, we need you to come to school, because the mother of the child who had said those kind of words had called, because I think someone had told the parent that this is what they said to this boy. So then the mother asked the son, like, so why didn't you tell me? And he says to the mom, I'm so used to it. I've tried to tell the teachers and the principals, they've not responded. So I don't know what's new here, you know. And it really broke my heart to see, you know, the extent of how much, you know, the young children or the people that are affected are ignored. And in response to that, I would say one of the things that really would then be an issue is the lack of policy. You know, you would go in sometimes and look at organizations and you talk about look at their other policies for other issues, they are there. But when it comes to racial policies, there is nothing. So in that space, if there is nothing, then it means that the school or the people that are responsible believe that there is nothing called racism in their school. Because if there was, they would put together a policy to say this is what you do in case of this happens, for accountability. So I think there is lack of people of, like, for them at the top of accepting, of believing that there is racism. You know, we're still at the point of denial. So if there is denial of that racism exists, there's not going to be policy. So in absence of policy, there's really nothing that, like I think as Otu was saying, that as, like, say you are a teacher or someone who's there, you might bring up the case, say to the staff, to the next staff person and whatever, and then it just ends there because there is no accountability, there is no policy. And it's something that I think we are not, as a society, at a point where we are comfortable of talking about it and saying, how do we move forward? It's something that we still want to put under the carpet and say it does not exist. You know, so we haven't really gotten those. So for me, it's being able to put those policies, because if there is a reporting structure, like you would see when we talk about the children first, you know, when something happens to a child, you know, for safety and children's first, you know what to do. There's a mandated person and there's a follow-up up until, and that case will not just be left aside. So that same system that is there for children's first could be applied as well within the school system. So you as a teacher, you know exactly the child has come in, and then you are able to know the steps to take. And as well, it's also for me, it's for you as the person that the child is reporting to maybe gaslight or say this is not it, or lessen the what the child is going through. Because with racism, the person who's affected is the one who can tell you how they feel and can really describe the situation. We can come in as maybe same two Black people, and something is said to both of us. I might feel to me it's nothing, or it doesn't affect me like the next person, because that person, like what was saying, there is some intergenerational trauma or something, or they've heard it so many times, so they might be affected. So you cannot say it's not. The person who's affected is the one. So for your duty is to listen, and also to be able to say, yes, this is what the person is telling you. Because then if you go in with bias and putting that, not being open-minded or not accepting, we are not going to go past that, because you've already judged it and said, no, it's nothing. And I've seen that in most places, and it's because we want to deny it. You want to, because if you say no, it's not, then you are finished. But if you say it happened, then what's next? How do I deal with it? And people are not ready to deal with it. So we need to get to a point of where we're able to do that. And as well, we need to have those conversations, start those difficult conversations, get those spaces, the platforms to talk about, to have this conversation, to talk about it, and training, awareness, and it will help in order to address these things. Little by little, things will get there. But if we ignore, we're still at the same point, and we'll keep on talking and doing this. There are times where I usually would have people maybe who come in and they'll be asking to do research on how minority communities feel or what happens. And I'm saying, guys, there's enough research now that you can just do secondary data. You don't need to be asking us one and the same thing. What we need now is, where do we move from there? Because the data is there, racism is there. So what's the next stage? That is where we're stuck. We have the information, we have researched, we still have it. We want to keep on getting money to research and research and research. Let's move to the next stage. That is where we're stuck. Let's have the policies change and then move forward to the next step. That's where we're stuck. Once we put that together, start having the training, even in something when teachers are doing the training, have that embedded within the training of the teachers. Part of the curriculum is something that's being addressed. Someone that they know that this is what's going to happen, and it will happen. I'll take, for example, with the community and youth development faculty that I'm working on. When there are children, when there are people, when their students are going on placement, they already do that training. Every student goes through training about anti-racism and the things that are going to, you have duty of care for the people that you are going to work with, because they are minority communities, and sometimes they don't even understand. You might see it and they don't know. So if you don't know how to act or have a structure of it, you're just going to ignore, because ignoring is the easiest way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Spiwe. Audrey or Lillian, either of you? Wonderful. Thank you, Spiwe.
Maybe just to add to what Spiwe was saying about responsibility and denial there. I mean, I think sort of as a starting point, it is about equipping teachers with the kind of cultural literacy to really reflect on what it means not to respond in a situation like that, not to use whatever tools do exist, right? So it's far from a perfect kind of space, right? But there is at least some kind of an infrastructure there in terms of anti-race, anti-bullying guidance, which contains which does focus on identity-based bullying. So identifying that as racist name calling and the severity of that, and that there is kind of a national legislative framework around that. So it's in a way it's about educating people as to their responsibility, right? In that kind of a situation, I think, as you know, as a starting point at least. But you know, and part of it is just about, I think, yeah, providing people with a vocabulary. You know, you know, sometimes you know, it's not coming from necessarily a sort of a denial. You know, it can be from a place of like, I don't know what to do, right? And then that, you know, or I was caught in the headlights, or in that moment I didn't know, you know, how to respond to this. But you see, ultimately it's like, you know, it's not really about our intention, right? It's about the effect that it has. Okay, so it's about, I think, bringing into conscious awareness of those who, you know, are not the subject or the object of racism, to really think through the implications of this, you know, for those whose lived reality is the kind of cumulative, and the effect is really the cumulative impact of these racial microaggressions that you've spoken of, you know, and how that wears people down over time, you know, and how how refusing or simply not taking any kind of action is essentially allowing racists to act with impunity. And you're basically giving the message that, you know, you don't think this is important enough to respond to. So it's really, it's about kind of disarticulating the intention from the effects and privileging what the consequences and effects are, and using the infrastructure that we do have to, I suppose, enable people to, you know, fulfill their responsibility, you know.
Yeah, well said. Very, very well said. Thank you, Audrey. Over to you, Lillian.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey and Spiwe. Like, I would always allow Spiwe go first. I was looking down when you asked the question, so you wouldn't call me again. And I'm glad Spiwe went first. I'm not going to repeat everything she said. Definitely agree. I just want to use an example from a primary school I was at recently. And again, also an example from what you said, Melanie, that your students are always saying, please help me, please help me. Now, these are extremely intelligent students. Like, they can figure it out themselves if they want. But I went to this primary school and it was the same. Please tell us what to do. We had a child who called another child a racial slur. And this is like the third primary school that is frantically looking for someone to come tell them what to do, because these things have started happening in recent times. And I asked what was done. First of all, what's the policy? We hear the bullying policy. I think that's something we really should resist. Spiwe, I definitely do agree with you. Racism and bullying are they're very, very different things. The kind, I'm not downplaying the trauma bullying causes, but I'm just saying there are two different things. This issue of, oh, we have an anti-bullying policy doesn't work. I don't think it works, but I won't overflog that. So I asked then, what did you do when this complaint came up, and what was the body language of the school in essence? And they said, look, you know, both of them are children. So we talked to both of them. And you see, we don't want to break the kid that said this XYZ. And what I found was that for the 10 minutes of the conversation, we were all focused on the kid that called another kid a racial slur. And no one was noticing the fact that we've left the person with the pain and are focusing on the person who caused the pain in order not to cause that person the pain. Who are we prioritizing, and how are we dealing with these issues? I will leave the answer to the teachers. I really don't believe that I need to tell a teacher what to do. What I do think is that people need to, first of all, we need to realize that people who are different from us experience the world extremely differently from the way we do. So people from the dominant origin need to know that you can't know the experience of other people. You will either have to read or listen to them, or I definitely agree with Spiwe, you have to believe them. Because if you don't believe them, you would think, oh, this is not such a big deal. And even though you don't say it, it will play out in your body language. Because like in my own kids' school, there was the Nazi salute, there were all sorts of racial slurs, and it was the people who were called the racial slurs that left the school. So in the end, nothing was done. So I do think that there is need to, like, I don't know how to tell you, oh, XYZ should be in the policy. But again, if we sit down and if we sincerely look into our various contexts, we will be able to put something together. What I would say is that acknowledge the pain, even though you don't know what to do, even though policies are not there yet.
Yeah.
Acknowledge the pain that people are going through first is a good start point. And then we can now take all the other advice about policy and things, but don't dismiss the pain of someone who has had the boldness to come forward. I think Sarah Ahmed wrote a book called Complaints, where she talks about how people's complaints are treated. So a person summons up courage to come and give a complaint, and you throw the complaint in the dustbin, not in the first minute the person comes, well, you do nothing about the complaint. So the person relieves the pain by telling you the story and then just goes back and you leave the person there. That's another level of damage. And that's why I'm saying, when we're talking about inclusion, what are you including these kids or these adults into if they cannot even share pain?
Wow, marvelous. Thank you. In the Black church in America, when speakers have spoken something really powerful, they normally take it, the Baptist churches, they take off their shoe and they throw it at the speaker and they say amen. So I just want to take a moment to say amen, Audrey, amen, Spiwe, and amen, Lillian. If you were in the same room, I would have thrown my shoe at you, because you guys are really preaching right now. Really, really wonderful inputs. Thank you so much. Listen, so now let's just talk about the curriculum a bit, because one of the things that has come up as well, and for my participants, was the literature, right? The literature that they have in the post-primary context. And in particular, 2 books, Of Mice and Men, and what's the other one now? To Kill a Mockingbird, right? So those 2 books contain racial slurs. And when these were read out loud in class, my participants, shared how they found that to be deeply, deeply, deeply hurtful and highly, highly offensive. And so I wanted to pose the question to you to say, how can this be addressed? Like, I know from the research that I've done that some states or districts rather in the United States have taken very different approaches, some more milder than others. I know that some districts have totally banned those 2 books. Not that I'm advocating the banning of books, I'm just saying what several districts have done. Other districts have said, no, we're not going to read these books in the classroom. However, we will have them in the library for whoever wants to read them in the library. Okay, so my question is, there's a scenario I've given you, reading Of Mice and Men. It's got racial slurs in it. My student is sitting in the classroom, and there we are just blurting out the N-word as though it's nothing. And my student actually said, and everybody in the classroom turned around and looked at me as the only student of color in the class. And those who knew that, they're not, that it's offensive to say the N-word, was sort of like looking at the students and smirking as if to say, wow, what you going to say about this now? So in your opinions and in your thoughts, how can this be addressed? It's in the curriculum, it's in the content, it's in the reading list, it's in the books that we're reading in our classes. So do we do anything about it? Should we not do anything about it? Is it not offensive? Just 2 weeks ago, I went to an educators meeting, and it was a blend of educators and NGO agents, and one of the themes was racial slurs in the classroom. And so someone said, well, I just think that people need to develop a thick skin. I think I nearly fell off my chair, by the way, but I said nothing. And this person said, people need to just learn how to reclaim words and reclaim their language and just develop a thick skin. That's all that needs to happen here. So over to you.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm not sure I should be the first one to speak for this one, but I'll go for it. In my own research, someone also brought that up. But interestingly, this is what she said. She said that when the book was read out in class, people then took it as license to start using the N-word. Suddenly, I wouldn't say fortunately, because it is not fortunate that anyone gets sick, but that teacher got sick and had to move, and another teacher came to cover for that teacher, and the teacher decided, we will not read that word. So there was creativity. The teacher was able to do that, but that was an individual response from a teacher for whatever reason. So I think it is up to the teacher. However, talking broadly about language, and I don't know, I think my colleague is on this call, on our program, we had an issue where someone accused another person of using language. And when it was brought to me, I had never heard that language before. So if I was in the classroom and someone said that to someone, I wouldn't even know it is offensive because I had never heard it before. So what we decided was that we were going to use case studies to try to explore it in the class. But when preparing our case studies, we then asked, shall we use the words as they are, or shall we not? And I think that there is a wider discussion to be had about language, because if you do not know something is offensive, and I'm not saying I do not agree that we should be using offensive words, but this happened to me and I had never heard that word before. It's an offensive term towards someone who is disabled. I had never heard it before. So I would have been going about as a student and I would hear that and I wouldn't be able to pull anyone out. So it was a debate that we had. Now, in the end, we didn't even use the case study, but I just thought it was very interesting. So there are racial slurs that we know that most people know. But at what point can we have a conversation where we say, the person said, I remember in one of my classes, I used the N-word because I was relaying to someone what someone had said to me. And one of my students said, I'm not having this conversation. How can you use that word? And I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm telling you what someone said to me. I'm not saying it to you. So I don't know. There's something about language that's sometimes we are not really exploring it critically, because my student in that case used it as a diversionary tactic. I no longer want to speak anything about race because you use the N-word. So I don't know. But back to your initial question, teachers, from my own research, I can see that teachers can choose not to use that word and to say, in this class, we will not use that word. And if you ask me, it's a very good teaching opportunity to say, even though this word is in the book, unpack it, have a one-day workshop about it, and let the students then know why you're not using that word. That's what I would say. But just broader, I think that we can talk about language.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Lillian, for those experiences. Audrey Spiwe?
Okay, I was giving Audrey a chance to speak, and then
You're very kind.
Yeah, I suppose I mean, for me, a lot of it boils down to why these texts continue to be used in the first place. You know, I mean, I think maybe To Kill a Mockingbird has been taken off the list. I'm not 100% sure. So if there's, I stand corrected possibly there, but and I suppose we are seeing, at least, you know, in light of activism around this, and you know, people taking a stand against this, we are seeing, at least, you know, like the NCCA did commission, you know, a report to look at this issue. But like these texts are problematic in so many ways. You know, you've alluded to, you know, the use of the N-word, which is so prevalent in these texts. But there's, I suppose, added to that, then, or linked to that, there's all sorts of problems with how race and racism are being represented, right? And what, again, it's like, well, what messages are they sending? Because it sort of gives the impression that racism is something that's happened in the past, something that happens over there, right? And it tends to, they tend to have kind of similar tropes, right? It's like, well, you know, racism tends to be portrayed, you know, as like, oh, it's a few bad apples, and it tends to get sort of put onto, like, you know, poor white communities, and all, so there's all sorts of things going on, and kind of subtext that are going on, all sorts of messaging that that these books contain. So I think for me, you know, we need to start thinking about speaking back to the idea that we have to have these you know, these texts, this canon of texts that for some bizarre reason, you know, people are very attached to, and look
Yeah.
at why are people, and why are, you know, people who are in positions of authority so
Yeah.
attached to these texts that they can't hear what's being said to them in terms of this is the effect that this is having when I have to sit in a classroom and listen to this, or, you know, as Lillian was saying, it amplifies, it has an amplifying effect, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's just kind of unconscionable that at this point we haven't kind of just gone, okay, let's move beyond this idea that a canon, that we need to somehow respect this canon, and can we not look at all of the incredible kind of resources that we could be drawing upon in terms of, you know, looking at addressing how, you know, the persistence of racism in contemporary Irish society. I mean, we're not short of, you know, brilliant examples of literature that can speak to that issue. So I think, yeah, this is another thing that I think as educators, we need to kind of really take on and start speaking back to this and say no more. It's just, this is not really viable, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Excellent. Thank you so much. So let's just finally in the curriculum now, what role would you say that the curriculum plays as it stands in either perpetuating racial inequality, racial inequalities, or, you know, hindering them, fostering racial exclusion? What effect do you think the curriculum has? Because one of the things that my research participants have said was that we look at the curriculum and we don't see ourselves represented there. It's a total obliteration of ourselves. We don't see ourselves. It's all Eurocentric and we're not there. And worse still, they were like, okay, if we didn't see ourselves in the curriculum, that's one thing. But if I look at the posters that are on the wall, the posters, even those, I can't see myself represented there. So what role would you say our current curriculum plays in perpetuating racial inequalities? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I think for me, we've almost tied some of the stuff, like to say the material that's being seen, you know, like when you walk into an environment, is that environment even like visual? Is it inclusive enough? Does it have you know, any figures, or what is the material that's being used? Is it something that we, like, you know, resonate, or that looks that what can we say, that can show the diversity of the different people that are there? But most of the times, like, if we have the same figures or same material that being used, where the other people don't see themselves in those materials, you kind of like detached from the material that's being used, because you're thinking this does not apply to me. And also in terms of even with the research or examples that are being used, you know, like, or like I think I've seen most of the research, or sometimes when when we're reading research and case studies, and the case studies that are being done, and sometimes when I was in class, I would roll my eyes. I'm like, no, you know, this, I mean, like, it doesn't really apply in the context. I remember at one point we're doing, I think it was about research, and I was laughing, and I say to myself, you know what, if I was like, if I could bring my parents here and I was here and looking at the research, I'll definitely take them to jail, because according to what I'm reading, and the research is totally different of how I lived my life. You know, when we grew up, you grew up going to school, and you would walk, and sometimes you come home, you eat later, and it made you like, you felt differently, because we're here, we think like, you know, that made me want to be better, to be what. But when you look at the research, the absence of those things means that you should be somewhere, maybe like, having some trauma and stuff like that. It's because to me it doesn't look real, because you haven't researched the people that you are talking about. So I'm looking at those case studies in class, and I'm going and rolling my eyes. Sometimes I wrote those case studies because I wanted to pass, but actually I wanted to say this is not it from my perspective, because then being able to also use material that also I could say I'm writing, because at the end of the day, sometimes these other things that the material that's there, you're just doing so that you pass as a student, but you
Yeah.
actually know that no, this in the way that I'm represented or reflected in this is actually not me.
Yeah.
But if I
Yeah.
started to say no, they would then say, but the research says. But who has been researched? Who are the case studies for? Who are the participants of the case studies that are being taught to us? So for me, it's also those things, they keep on going at the, those things. So now also being able to say, I have a diverse population within my students. Now I can learn from other cultural backgrounds and then use that richness. The fact that there are different cultures and different experiences, it should be a powerful tool to enrich the classes and the curriculum and the teaching, because we are all sharing, learning from each other. Like, okay, this to me it meant this, and this to me, and making the case studies that are now reflecting what's here, not one population and then being the standard. Because then to some people they might look at it and say, oh, which means something was wrong, and then someone looks at it, and then it depends on how we would laugh at it, but someone else might not laugh at it and might start believing that, okay, maybe this is how it's supposed to be, and it might trigger some stuff within. But so for me, it's also looking at that and saying, okay, these are things, or even the languages, the richness, because having a diverse class students should be used as should be seen as an advantage, because now you are bringing different voices, different cultures into one room and different perspective. So if you are a tutor and you really like, you want to go forward, it's nice to take advantage of that and then explore from that point, and then instead of working with the standard. I know that research matters as well in an academic setting, and I'm trying, when I'm talking, I need to put myself in the academic setting, but I usually don't operate in the academic setting. So sometimes, so I'm always reflecting as someone who was a student, and as well, obviously, one point or the other occasionally at the educator side, but I sit in the seat of the student, because for me, that is where my journey for this began, because I was seeing all those things happening, and I was sitting there and I'm thinking, I just passed because but I don't agree.
Yeah, it made me just think of something just very quickly before I go to Audrey and Lillian. What really struck me there, what you said is pure, it said, who does the research? And the question that I'm asking is, okay, so who writes the curriculum? Who does this research that is in the curriculum? So excellent, thank you. Audrey, Lillian, do you want to jump in there and say to that? Because again, my students say to me, but Melanie, we have a curriculum. We have to follow the curriculum. So we have to prepare our students for the leaving set and the junior set. And this is what do we do? So what would you advise? What can they do? What do they do? Just take it as it is, and is there anything that they can do? Should they just roll with it, and there's nothing that they can do because it is what it is?
Again, Spiwe, I think today I'll just keep saying I agree with Spiwe, and we'll move on with things because I just agree with her. But I think Kende Andrews does a very good tracing of the fact that the things that have become our educational system and our universities today can be directly linked to people with very, very, very racist ideas in those years. So generally our canon is very, very racist. But I think the question is and again, decolonizing the curriculum has I think it has officially attained buzzword status. So everyone is talking about decolonizing the curriculum. I'm not even really sure I really understand what we mean these days when we're saying decolonizing the curriculum. But what I will say, I definitely agree with Spiwe, everything she's saying, who is doing the research, what contexts are we taking into consideration. One thing I will discourage for these your wonderful students who are asking you again what they can do is what people are doing, decolonizing the curriculum, is bringing in things that's parachuting in. Okay, so we'll just add an anti-racism module to Melanie's program and all is well. Again, there is an issue with that. It becomes very tokenistic. People now say, oh, sure, Lillian is coming in for the anti-racist module. And when she goes next week, we'll go on with our lives and everything remains the same. So what I will really encourage, and I don't even know that if that's your question, but I will just say that, and because I'm mindful of time, is an embedding from start to finish. And by start, I don't even mean the start of, like, who is even doing the curriculum in the first place? So if we go back to that premise that we experience lives differently, that's why we keep saying, as cliched as it is, representation really does matter. Because if we all experience life differently, we need as many experiences as possible on the table so that when people, because we are all blind spotted, every single one of us, like I will see things in a certain way. But when I come and Spiwe says, oh no, you're not looking at it this way. And then Audrey says, but you're not looking at it this way. We have something robust. But until, have you looked at the policy-making bodies in Ireland for education? They are very white. So how we expect that anything is going to change beats me. We need to do it as a matter of urgency, because, like, no matter how much we talk, if the people who are on the table making the decisions, writing these curriculums, writing all sorts of things. Now, I know that we have power as educators to go into the space and turn it on its head. I do that every single day of my life. I know colleagues who do that. It's not about being black or white. It's about being critical about your space. But I really do think we need to get back to, where does this whole thing start? And how can we change it? And again, Melanie, one last point. I do not believe throwing in minoritized people randomly will do the magic. I do think that even the minoritized needs to be critically educated to be able to make a change. If not, we replicate the things we're complaining about.
100%. Thank you, Lillian. Audrey, did you want to chip in there? Is there anything you wanted to add to that, or?
Just very briefly. I mean, I think it's the way you frame the question is so interesting in terms of, you know, students this kind of coming to saying, you know, what can we do? What can we do? And I think, you know, that's kind of where, you know, kind of deconstructing that question and that mindset that, you know, that somebody else is going to tell them what to do, you know, and I suppose, you know, looking at why is it that they're asking that question in the first place, and asking that question of you, and, you know, maybe the response kind of needs to be figure it out, you know, you know, figure it out yourself, because I think we create the expectation, you know, that students can ask for you know, the solution, and somebody's going to give them the solution, whereas really I think we should be equipping them with the kind of metacognitive tools to find their own way.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. I was going to ask, just the final question then is just what obstacles that educators currently might encounter when they try to implement racially inclusive practices, and how these can be addressed. So maybe just each one of you, just identify one obstacle and how it can be addressed, and then we will end the question session, and we'll move on to Q&A. Okay, so will we start with who? Spiwe, will we go with you again? So Lillian can just say, I agree with Spiwe, and then Audrey can answer the question, and then we can move on to the Q&A. How's that?
I think for me, I'd want to echo as well, Lillian, in terms of saying, when I say this, lack of representation of teachers, I don't mean that also just for that where we just throw in teachers from minority communities just for the sake of saying now we have representation. So we need to be very intentional about it and very strategic to saying what is it that we're putting them into? Do they even have support themselves to when they go in to address these issues? So we need to have that environment, that platform that will make them thrive and be able to take on this duty, not just for the sake of saying now we have a university that has 50% of minority and all that kind of stuff. So that I would say that we need to improve. Really, let's see a diverse population of teachers and educators in all the spaces, so to represent and be there, but not just for the sake of having them. To be intentional about it.
Not for tokenism. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Lillian, and then Audrey, or Lillian, whichever one.
I will say the emotional burden, isolation, and resistance from people who don't want to hear about this kind of work. And how you can deal with it, communities of practice, like just let's have communities of practice.
Yeah, thank you. Audrey?
I think, well, one obstacle is kind of perception. It's perceptual, and I think not being afraid to make mistakes or to kind of embrace the inevitability of making mistakes and to see those as as very rich learning experiences. I think perfectionism is a tool of the oppressor, so yeah, having that kind of sensibility that you will make mistakes, and but that's how progress happens.
Yeah, and that's a key point, because one of the things that's come up in the research, in this tutor research, is that teachers are so, educators in general are so afraid to make mistakes. They're so afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing and they're going to offend someone, and then guess what? They're going to be labeled a racist, and guess what? They're going to be cancelled. So that's an excellent point, and yet I love that phrase, Audrey. Wow, that perfectionism is a tool of the oppressor. And it really does stand in the way of progress, really, because then it keeps us immobilized, because then you fear doing anything for fear of doing the wrong thing. And yet that in itself is an act of oppression. Not doing anything is an act of oppression on its own. Listen, Lillian, Spiwa, and Audrey, it has been an absolute delight chatting. We could go on forever. I would have loved this to be an even longer chat. I just want to say thank you so very much for your valuable inputs and your contributions. I've learned so much from talking to you. I really wish we were buddies in real life and would have these conversations around a cup of coffee. It would be really, really good. But thank you so very much for availing yourselves for participating in this webinar. We really, really appreciate it. And at this point in time, I will now hand over to the audience, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. And we will now take questions from the audience. Bernie and Sinead, I don't know, do we have any questions in the chat?
Hi, Melanie. One has just come in. I have a question. I'm currently on teaching placement in the school I attended, and I can see that it is slowly becoming more diverse and multicultural. As a language teacher, how can I ensure my classes include all?
There we go. That's a question to the panelists. As a language teacher, how can I be sure that I include all in this classroom that has become progressively diverse? It's a very broad question, but maybe we can each throw in one thing. Or
Yeah, so I thank you to the person who asked the question. I would say whether language, whether rocket science, biology, maths, whatever it is you're teaching, if you can create a space in your classroom where people are comfortable to share. And I know it is really difficult with the pressure, the time pressure teachers face, but there are ways. if you can create that atmosphere, and I think a lot of the time there's almost the fear to relinquish control of your class in quotes. But if you can spend the time, especially at the beginning of term, to create that atmosphere where people can tell you things, so they will shout if they need issues. If they have issues, they will tell you. If they are not following, they will tell you. If they're uncomfortable, they will tell you. Just create the space and normalize these kinds of conversation is what I will say, is what I will do, because I'm also minoritized. I might be blinded to things that the dominant ethnic people will know. So just create the space where people can call you out. Ego. I think we need to work on ego and just lower our guards and let people be able to share in the classrooms.
Wonderful. Okay. Does anyone else want to respond to that question, or will we move on to another question? It's pure order if you'd like to respond. Or if not, we can move on to the next question. Perhaps maybe I can chip in there. Ospiwe, were you ready to go? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying that I think what Lillian has just said, just creating the platform, and not sometimes, you know, we judge ourselves and like we want to say the right things, just as long as you are providing that platform and people are able to share. And sometimes, like, because it's language, you can always also make it more like creative, allowing, you know, to share the different languages. Or for me, it's sometimes when you work in there's different people from different languages, you just do. These days we've got these tools on social media, just say do your greetings in your different languages. It makes someone, then you create that, and then someone feels like, I participated, I said hello in my language, and then you share, and then you move on with your language. So it's just kind of being inclusive in a nice interactive way.
I love that. That's very practical. Thank you. Audrey, did you want to say something, or will we move on to the next question? Okay.
I think we can move on.
Perfect. Okay, Sinead?
Another question has come in. Sorry, it's moved. How can teachers trust how can students trust their teachers that they will listen and be heard? Also, as parents, how can we teach children to advocate for themselves in schools, to have a voice? Very good question.
That's very good. Yeah.
I think relationship matters with the children. You know, like I always say, young people or students, they know when someone is genuine. They know if you are faking it. And so even when you go in and when they tell you an issue, the way that you are responding, they will see it. So just be real with young people or students most of the times, because they know. And as parents as well, I think it's important to ask your children to speak out when something happens, because we have had issues where, like, we have seen it. We also, like, even us as adults, sometimes it's very difficult to speak out when we're in situations. But we need to empower the young people to say, when there is something that's wrong, approach your teacher. If your teacher doesn't respond or come to say something or to show that they are supporting you, come back to me, you know, and then we can work this out. So if they see that you are also their support system, so you work hand in hand with the teachers as well, so that if the child is not heard, they know my mom will listen to me and she will try and see how to find support for myself.
Thank you so much, Spiwe. I just want to sort of like add to that question and maybe throw it back to Audrey and Lillian. One of the things that came up in my research, and some of the participants have said, is that it wasn't that they didn't have a voice, right? It wasn't that they didn't speak up. It was that nobody listened. And so they felt like, okay, well, if you're not going to listen when I report something, that in essence is silencing me. So I'm not going to report it the next time it happens or the next time it happens, because guess what? There's just been a history of nothing being done. So that way, that silences the students. So can we talk to that, or talk around that, or what would we say to that?
Again, this doesn't happen only in school. So in my own research as well, there was